So chances are when you're building your application, you're going to be using some type of external resources. Now these might be video files, audio files, images, XML files, but it's likely you're going to be using some of these types of assets. So it's good to know how to actually reference assets in your application. So as I've shown you already in a couple of movies, the resources for your application are stored in this resource directory, which is just RES for short. And some of the ones that are included automatically are layout. This is where our XML layouts are, which define our UI. Inside of the values folder, this is where we actually have values that are used throughout our application. And here's one called strings.xml. So the way this works is we have a XML file here, and we have certain string resources. So anywhere in my application where I want it to say hello world main, I'm actually going to reference this resource. So why do we keep it external? Well, obviously for globalization or internationalization of our application, we can actually provide different folders for different languages. That way, all we have to do is to go and to create a new XML file in a different language. We don't have to go through all of our application code and fix things that we've hard-coded. But there are lots of other types of resources that we can store in here. So I'm going to quickly go to the Android developer site. One of the things you're going to want to get very familiar with is this dev guide. This contains tons and tons of useful information for you as you're building applications. So I'm going to go to Application Resources here and then click on Providing Resources. This is just a good overview of how resources are used and accessed in Android. But of particular interest, if we scroll down, here we have the different types of directories that are supported in the Resources directory. So we have an anim folder, which is obviously short for animation, and this is where we can provide XML files that define animations, and we're going to be getting into that in a later movie. If we want to have a list of colors that our application uses in XML, we can put it in a color folder. Any of our images or even XML-defined graphics are in the drawable directory. Layouts contain our XML layouts. If we want to create menus like option menus, which we'll be doing in another movie, we're going to save them into the menu directory. Raw is the folder where we actually store raw streams of data, and this is useful for video and audio, so things that are accessed just as raw streams of data. And then values, like I mentioned, contain simple values like strings, integers, and colors. And then lastly, we have an XML directory. If we want to bundle XML files with our application and reference them, we use the XML directory. Now you may be wondering right here, what is this assets folder? Well, assets folder is basically a folder that you can put resources in, but they're not referenced by an ID in the application. There are no IDs generated for those resources. And in general, I like it best to keep all of my resources inside of this res directory. So let's actually bring in a few different types of assets. So if we look in the exercise files, and we're on the desktop here, go into exercise files, into the assets folder, there are some assets that I've included for you, and they range from audio files to video files to images. Let's just import some of these. So the easiest way to import things into our Android project here is just to select them. Let's say I want to import these two images, and I'm just going to drag them into the drawable directory. And it's going to ask us, how do we want to import them into the project? We want to copy those files. And now we have them as part of our project. Now, one of the things I'm sure you're noticing is this directory is not drawable. It's drawable-HDPI. And this is for high DPI devices. And then we have another folder for low DPI devices and medium DPI devices. And this is another powerful feature of Android. Basically, we can put different assets that we want to use for these different DPI screens, and the system will automatically pull out the correct ones based on the user's actual hardware that they're using. And we're going to get into this in another movie, but just know that by putting them in the HDPI folder, even if we're on a medium or low DPI device, it's still going to use these. That's all you need to worry about for now. So now if we actually go in this gen folder, you can see, and this is the file like I mentioned before that you don't want to edit, but it is helpful to look at. we can see that what happens as you add resources to your project, Android is actually adding properties in here to reference. So we have that Amsterdam photo, and it's created an ID that we can use to reference it throughout our project. Now, we don't actually give this number in our project. We actually use another method to actually get to this ID. So let's take a look at that. I've just created a blank project here. There's been nothing done to this project except we just imported those assets. So I'm going to go into the layout, and I'm going to get rid of this text view. Another thing to know about this graphical layout here is that we can change the size of our display to see how it's going to look on different sizes. So now it's QVGA. If we wanted to see what it looked like on a WVGA, which is what our emulator is at, we can choose that. Now this is a little big for my resolution here, so I'm just going to lower it here. Just something like that. This is fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an image view to our layout here. And again, this is something that allows us to obviously to display an image. Well, let's say I want to display this Amsterdam image that I imported. So I can do this by going into the properties here. And this is the properties for this image view. And you'll notice if I come down, we have a source property. By default, it's actually defaulting to the icon image that ships, by default with every application. What I'm going to do is change it. So I'm just going to click here and click on this button, and it's going to allow me to choose any items from my drawable directory. So I'm going to choose Amsterdam, click OK, and now we have our image inside of here. So again, that's how we actually reference things in the XML. Now let me actually show you in the XML view what that looks like. So here you can see we have the source property. When we're actually referencing things, we're going to use an @ symbol. And now we can choose from the different directories. But I want to go into drawable. And again, I can hit Control Space to get code hinting. So we're saying at the drawable directory, give me the Amsterdam image. Now remember, we don't say drawable -HDPI here. Again, the system takes care of that. So our application only references the drawable folder, and then the Android system will choose the correct size graphic to match whatever the user's device is. So that's how to reference it from the XML. Let me show you how to reference it from the Java code. So let's go to our Java code, and let's say as soon as we come into our activity in the onCreate, let's go ahead and set the image view. So I'm going to get a reference to that, IV, and again, to get our layout, we're going to use find view by ID, r.id. There's our image view. And again, we're going to have to cast that to image view. Now let's say we actually want to set the image to the Lima photo, which is the other photo in there. I can do set image resource. So now we're going to set that image equal to one of the resources that I have in my project. Now to reference it from here, we're going to reference it to that R class, which is auto-generated. Then we're going to go to drawable, and then to Lima. So this, obviously, we're only going to be able to test it when we run the application. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's bring up the emulator. Because in our XML, we reference the Amsterdam photo. Again, after the onCreate is called, we're actually changing it and say, no, show me that lima.jpg image, which we can see here. And this is just an energy drink that you can get in Lima, Peru. So again, this is how we reference resources, both from the XML and from the Java code. Now, these things are slightly different based on the type of resource and how you're going to handle that resource. But just remember, whenever you add stuff to the resource directory, behind the scenes, Android is creating this file, which holds all of the references to your resources and the IDs, so that you're only ever referencing r.drawable.lima here. So the resource system takes a little bit of getting used to, but it becomes very, very powerful, especially when you're targeting different devices and different languages.